Do you think you're currently covering everything in your fitness program? Well, in this episode, I'm going to give you 2 pieces that you're probably not doing. I have one major regret about what my wife and I did not do during her menopause transition struggles. I want to thank Orange Theory for making this series possible. What was my one regret? That I did not get specific health data for my wife. In particular, blood work that had the hormones estradiol, progesterone, and follicle stimulating hormone. Now you may ask, what's special about those hormones? If you haven't gone back and watched the second episode in this series, I did an entire breakdown of why these specific hormones are important and why we need to be aware of what's happening to them during our menopause transition. The second thing that I wish we would have gotten on my wife was a DEXA scan. A DEXA scan would have given us not only her bone mineral content data, but also the amount of body fat and muscle mass that she had. If you're watching this and you haven't gotten blood work recently and you haven't gotten a bone mineral density scan, get this data now if you can. You won't regret it. What we're going to do in this episode is form a comprehensive fitness program. Now, we've already had episodes and instruction on resistance training. In the previous episode, we talked about cardio. And in this episode, I'm going to make an argument that it's important to include some power and agility training in your fitness program. As I've been doing throughout this entire series, make sure that you understand that every woman's experience will be different going through menopause. I like to categorize the experiences as cruisers, grinders, and train wrecks. It's very important that we acknowledge and appreciate the different experiences, different energy levels, different abilities to recover. So I'm not going to cover them now, but in several previous episodes, I went over all of these experiences, and we have to have an appreciation for what these are. If you love what you're currently doing in your fitness program, let me applaud you for being fit and embracing a fitness lifestyle, and to encourage you to keep doing it. One of my biggest pet peeves is all of the black and white advice that seemingly comes from everybody who has an opinion on fitness. If you are embracing a fitness lifestyle, that is the goal. Now, if you were going to ask me what I think the best program variables should be in a comprehensive fitness program, I would say 4 things. Resistance training should serve as the foundation. We want to add cardio to improve our aerobic fitness. And in this episode, I'm going to encourage you to include some power and agility training. Relative to resistance training, the goal with that type of training is to build muscle and increase strength. And the reason why this becomes so important during this phase of life is because during the menopause transition, we know that we're losing muscle mass. So we want to do the exact type of training that will prepare us for this loss. And in fact, we want to build muscle and try to prevent the loss during the menopause transition. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to lean into what I call the best or aspirational resistance exercises that you can aim for. These 3 exercises are the squat, the bench press, and the deadlift. Do I expect everybody to be able to do these exercises? No. But if you have the capacity to do these, if you're healthy, and you're not currently incorporating these lifts in your program, let me encourage you to think about trying to learn how to do them and making them a part of your resistance training program. And if you're currently doing these exercises, again, let me just tell you how much I respect you and applaud you, because these are technical, advanced exercises. Now, for those of you that can't do these exercises, maybe you can do some of the lower progression forms of these exercises and work up to where you can do these. In this video, Cassidy and Valeria are going to go through the progressions of a back squat, starting with the easier forms of this exercise and moving towards the more complex.
The reason why we are starting with body weight squats is so she can get that technique and that form down perfectly before adding any type of progression, doing barbell squats, and adding any type of heavy loading. So I'm gonna teach her through the execution of how to do a proper body weight squat, providing some informative cueing. So Valeria, I'm gonna have you stand with her feet about hip distance apart, her toes pointing slightly outwards, and then she can keep her hands in front of her to where it's comfortable. She's gonna sit her hips back as if she's sitting down into a chair, keeping that chest up nice and high, and then her weight is gonna be distributed through the midfoot and through the heel, so not tipping too far forward nor too far backwards. She is going to keep those knees tracking over those toes, so not caving in or out, and then when she comes up, she's gonna squeeze her glutes at the top without pushing her pelvis forward. So that looks perfect right there on the form. Our next squat progression is going to be a dumbbell goblet squat. So since Valeria has that form executed perfectly on her body weight squats, we want to try and make it a little bit more challenging by adding some weight in there. So today's variation, she's going to do a goblet squat. So I'll have her pick up that dumbbell. She's going to hold it right in front of her, nice and close to her chest, elbows locked in, and then she's going to go into those squat repetitions. So again, same idea with the form here. She's going to sit down as if she's sitting into a chair, bringing those hips back, keeping that chest up nice and high. Those knees are tracking over those toes. She is pushing up through the midfoot and through the heel without letting that dumbbell tip too far in front of her. So the goal here is to just add some load, get her progressing to a point where she can eventually complete those barbell squats with a bit of a heavier weight. That looks perfect there on the form. All right, so the next thing we are gonna focus on is our squat progression now with the barbell. So as we progressed through doing body weight squats with the goblet, we are going to add some additional load now with the Olympic style barbell. So I am going to coach Valeria how to do a proper barbell squat, first executing that form perfectly, and then we are going to add some additional weight onto the bar. So Valeria, you can go ahead and step under the bar. So she is going to place the bar just on her sort of mid-trap area. She is going to grab the bar about just slightly wider than shoulder distance apart. She is going to take a couple steps back, having those hip about feet distance apart, toes pointed slightly outwards, remembering all the cues on our squat form, bringing those hips back, and then keeping that weight distributed through the midfoot and through the heel. Now, some important things to keep in mind is that you are not leaning too far forward nor too far back. So some important cues here is to keep your chest nice and tall and keep that spine nice and straight. So it looks like she is getting those barbell squats down perfectly. And then when she comes up, she is going to squeeze her glutes and not push her pelvis too far forward. You can go ahead and re-rack that bar whenever you're finished there, Valeria. Awesome job. All right, so now we're gonna have Valeria do her barbell squat. Now we're gonna add some additional weight onto the bar. So since she's got that form and that technique down perfectly with her squat, now we can start thinking about increasing the weight here. We've added a little bit of additional load. She is gonna go into that squat, keeping those same cues in mind. Now, when we add some weight to the bar, keep in mind that the sort of movement pattern might shift a little bit. So try and keep in mind all of those cues that you learned during your squat. So trying to push through those heels, keeping that chest up nice and tall, and keeping those knees tracking over those feet. That looks perfect there with her squat movement pattern. Now, as she gets more comfortable in this, she can keep increasing the weight so long that her form is good. She's not feeling the stress in her low back or her knees at all. And then we are trying to get her to sort of work in that 8 to 12 rep range, really challenging herself, increasing that effort, that intensity as she is progressing through her squat.
If you're not capable of doing squats, let me give you some other awesome exercises you can do, or that I love for the lower body. We have leg press, leg extensions, leg curls, lunges are awesome, step ups. So these are all exercises that will really stimulate the muscles in your lower body. All right, moving on to bench press. In this next video, Cassidy is going to work with Valeria on starting with some lower variations of a bench press and then progressing to the more complex.
All right, so next thing we're gonna do is go into our bench press progression. The first thing we're gonna have Valeria do is start with a floor press with dumbbells. So let's say you have never done a bench press before, or maybe you don't even have access to a bench press. We're gonna start with this variation to introduce the movement pattern and make sure form and technique is down perfectly. So we're gonna have Valeria lying on a mat. She is going to be flat against the floor. She is going to bring those dumbbells down to the point where her elbows are touching the floor, and then she is gonna drive up so those dumbbells are just barely touching. She is going to keep her back flat, chest up, and no overarching in the low back. That looks perfect there with form and technique. All right, so another good way to introduce bench press and build up that strength within the chest, in the shoulders, is to incorporate some push-ups. So this is another sort of progression as we are working towards getting that barbell bench press down. So as you can see, Valeria is doing a traditional push-up. She is executing it perfectly. Her chest is coming down, just hovering right above the floor. She's keeping those elbows slightly tucked into her body. She is in that plank position, so her back is flat, her butt is down, and her hands are just slightly wider than shoulder distance apart. So as you can see, she is keeping that tempo nice and consistent, going down with about a 3-second lowering phase, coming up, and then pausing slightly at the top. So this is our push-up progression. We are introducing that bench press variation as we can eventually progress to those barbell bench presses. All right, so the next thing we're gonna be getting into today is our bench press progression. So as you saw, we did that way to develop our strength within our chest and our shoulders. We worked on push-ups and we worked on that dumbbell floor press. Now, if it is within your capacity and you have access to a barbell bench press, this is a fantastic compound movement to be doing. So we are gonna coach Valeria through the bench press just with performing the weight with this bar. Now this bar is 45 pounds, but as she progresses into it, she can add some weight onto the barbell. So she is gonna go ahead and get herself set up on the bench. Both feet are gonna be planted on the floor. Her glutes are gonna be locked into the bench. Shoulder blades are gonna be tucked under, planted on the bench, and her head is gonna be at the very top. She is gonna go ahead and grab that bar slightly wider than shoulder distance apart, lift it up out of the hooks, and then she is gonna go ahead and bring that bar down to her sternum on a slightly diagonal angle. Now notice what her elbows do. They are not flaring out to the side too much at a 90-degree angle. They are staying slightly tucked under at about a 70-degree angle. And she is going ahead and bringing that bar up on that diagonal angle, bringing it up to the starting position. She is keeping those shoulder blades tucked under to allow her to produce a good amount of force, and feet are staying planted onto the floor. That looks perfect right there, Valeria.
An alternative to the full push-up when your feet are on the floor behind you is to put your knees on the floor. So your knees are anchored to the floor, and that can make the push-up an easier form for doing this movement. In this video, Cassidy and Valeria are gonna show us the deadlift progressions. Again, starting with the easy body motion of a deadlift, and then progressing to the more complex variations of this exercise.
All right, so now we're gonna move on to our deadlift progression variations. The first thing I want to focus on is teaching how to do a proper hip hinge movement. This is our foundation of the deadlift, so it is key that we get these body mechanics down first before we progress with adding a barbell or a trap bar variation. So I'm going to guide Valeria through how to do a proper hip hinge movement. So first thing she's gonna do is stand with her feet about hip distance apart. She's going to keep her spine neutral, so back nice and flat, not overarching it. And she is going to send her hips back and pretend like she is closing a door with her butt. She is going to lean forward, keeping that slight little bend in her knees. And then she's gonna come to about 90 degrees, or to the point where her hands are just hovering right below her knees. She's going to come up and then squeeze those glutes at the top without pushing her pelvis too far forward. That's perfect with the hip hinge movement. Once she gets that movement down, she gets the form executed well, we can introduce some weight. So I'm gonna have her pick up that kettlebell, and the next thing we can do is incorporate a kettlebell deadlift variation. So this is a way to keep getting that movement pattern down while adding some additional weight before we progress to our more difficult compound movement with the deadlift with a trap bar or with a barbell. So she is going to keep doing that hip hinge movement, keeping that kettlebell nice and close to her body, keeping that weight close to her shins. She is going to come up into the movement, keeping that pelvis tucked, and keeping that back nice and flat in that neutral spine. That looks perfect there, Valeria. All right, so next we're gonna go into our deadlift progression. So as you saw, we got Valeria executing that hip hinge movement pattern down perfectly. We introduced some weight with the form of a kettlebell, and now we are ready to progress to a conventional barbell deadlift, given that it is within your capacity and you feel comfortable performing this exercise. So I'm gonna coach Valeria through our conventional barbell deadlift here. So as you can see, she's gonna stand directly behind the bar with her feet about hip distance apart, toes pointed forward, and then she is gonna go ahead and grab that bar. Now Valeria likes to use an alternated grip for her deadlift. Some people like to use that form of a grip. Some people like to use pronated. It is really up to you and what is comfortable for you. Now, something to keep in mind when she is doing her deadlift is she is keeping that bar nice and close, locked towards her thighs and then locked towards her shins. This is gonna set her up perfectly to execute that form of the deadlift. She is gonna come down, sending those hips back. So remember that hip hinge movement that we executed before. Then she is gonna let that weight touch the ground and she is gonna come back up again, keeping that chest nice and tall. So that looks perfect there.
And I want to give some advice here. I want you to make sure that your form is perfect on these exercises. Now, while the overall injury rate of weightlifting is much lower compared to other sport-based activities, these three exercises, the bench press, the squat, and the deadlift, they are technical exercises. And let me also encourage you, if you've not done these before, work with a fitness professional. Let them teach you how to do these exercises and even to check in with them periodically to make sure that your form is good. And I want to reiterate, you don't have to do these exercises in your program, but I did want to prioritize these and mention these as the aspirational resistance training exercises. One of the best things about these exercises is that they are bone density promoting exercises. And remember, work within your capacity. If you're able to do these and aren't currently doing them, let me encourage you to bring them into your workout. If you're not capable of doing these at this time, focus on the types of exercises that you can do. We always want you to work up to your capabilities. In the last episode, we talked about cardio and how cardio is a great form of exercise to maximize or improve your aerobic fitness. We talked about different ways you can do this. One of them was high intensity interval training, or what some people call sprint interval training. But as long as your intensity is high, you are going to stimulate your body to improve its aerobic fitness. Now what I want to do is introduce two other forms of exercise that I like to what I call sprinkle into your comprehensive fitness program. One of them is power or explosiveness training, and the other is agility training. So I remember in my mind, and this is a vivid memory in my mind, and this was about 15 years ago, I went to a doctor's appointment with my wife, and we got to her doctor's appointment early. So we're sitting in the parking lot, and I remember on the right side, that was her building. We were gonna go into that building. And on the left side was a different medical building. And I remember sitting there, and I was watching people walk into this other building. And I don't even remember what building my wife was going to, and I don't remember specifically what the other building was. But what I vividly remember was the people walking in to this medical treatment facility was they were walking very slow. Most of them were older, but not all of them. Even the people that were with the patients were slow. And I remember thinking, I need to teach my students what I'm observing here. And at the time I was teaching strength and conditioning to my university students. And what I remember very clearly, everything about these people who were not well was slow. Feet were moving slow, couldn't lift their feet very high on the curb to get to the walkway. And what I remember thinking was, sickness equals slowness. As I took this impressionable moment, I remember thinking, I've got to tell my students, when we help people, we want to train to prevent this. And this is not just a sick consequence. We also have data just in aging. Research has reported that we have a loss of power that begins to be observed at the age of 40 and that the rate of this power decline is actually faster than the rate that we lose muscle mass. And this happens in both men and women. So how can we prevent this loss of power? How can we prevent from being slow? By training for explosive power. Now here are some examples of using this type of power training. Here's an example of a lower body power movement called an alternating split squat jump. Here's an example of an upper body power movement. It's a clap push-up. Now this is the most advanced form of this. And now we're gonna do a modified version, which is where the knees are anchored and in doing a clap push-up. Yes! Here's an example of a whole body dynamic power movement. One of my favorite lower body power exercises is the lower body box jump. Two notes about this. One, if you're suffering from urinary incontinence, this is an exercise that you may not want to do. The second thing is, as I have Cassidy demonstrate these, go ahead. This is not a conditioning exercise. You power up, you get down, recover, and then you do another rep. So you don't get out of breath doing these like you would other conditioning exercises. In addition to including some power exercises in our fitness routine, I also think it's really good to have some agility training. Remember, if slow is consistent with being sick or getting older, how can we work against that? By working on speed or agility drills. All right, these are just some simple agility drills that pretty much anybody can do on the lower level of agility drills. So the first one is just putting both feet in each square. Go ahead. Nice. Then we can do the same thing on a lateral trajectory. So now from the side. And notice the quick feet. And then the third one is a little more complex. This is 2 feet in and then 2 feet out. 2 feet in, 2 feet out. Again, love the quick feet. So you can notice that these agility drills can be literally used in a warm-up, or you can do these in a workout by themselves. Now, agility drills, and even the power drills that we just looked at, they don't have to be workouts on their own. In fact, when I do these, I just use them as part of my warm-up. So use them as part of your warm-up for a few minutes, or if you really enjoy them, you can program them to be a workout on their own. Thank you for letting me share my thoughts on what I think a very comprehensive fitness program should be. Resistance training, cardio, and power and agility training. If we have those 4 elements in our fitness program, I think we've got all of our bases covered. So tell me about your fitness program. What do you like to do? Are there certain things that you really don't like to do? Have I convinced you to include some agility and power exercises if you're not currently doing them? And if you are currently including these types of exercises, what are you doing? Comment below and tell me. And I want to thank Hone Health for making this educational series possible. And thank you, Orange Theory, for the awesome hospitality.